What we have next is a panel session which is really about trying to share some of the knowledge and success stories that individual CEOs and leaders have experienced in terms of digital transformation, and trying to provide a roadmap, particularly within higher education, as to how digitization works and doesn't work in certain circumstances. And to moderate the panel, we've got Parminder, Bahra, who is the executive producer of the Wall Street Journal. So I'll hand over to him, and he will lead the panel session for you. So thanks very much. Parminder.
Everybody,
welcome.
Close your eyes. Ascend, go up. Everybody, close your eyes.
Thanks, Jim. That's great. Got your shirt back.
You want some?
Please. Welcome, everyone, and thanks for coming to listen to this very interesting panel on mapping out a digital strategy for digital transformation in higher education. EdTech is a nice shorthand for digital technology in education. It fits in with other industries that have done similar things, such as fintech for the financial sector, AdTech for the advertising sector. But I would argue that the comparison kind of stops there. Compared to these other sectors, higher education still has some way to go to match the degree to which they've embraced and deployed digital technology. I think some of my panelists could take issue with me on that, but we're here to debate this. The potential rewards for a digital strategy are better student outcomes, enhanced student experience, and whisper it lower overheads, to name but a few. Now, who wouldn't want that? I'd argue that for now, the digital transformation and innovation is concentrated quite a lot in terms of scale. Think MOOCs and online courses from Coursera and FutureLearn, etc. But scale is not the only reason for investment in EdTech. Now, in 30 minutes, we've got the rather not insubstantial issue of trying to think about creating digital strategies. We'll look at setting out a bunch of objectives for HEIs and to look at the technology, the skills, the personnel, and leadership that you need to get there. We'll also look at some of the tools for innovation, such as virtual reality, augmented reality, and possibly data as well. So everything you'll need to go back to your offices and pitch your next digital project. We've got a fantastic panel spanning both the public and the private sector. We've got yourselves who should also be contributing. We want your questions, and we'll be bringing you in pretty early, so I'll be really keen to get your questions in as soon as possible. And I want to just begin by letting the panel introduce themselves and also just giving us a nugget, a kind of anecdote about digital strategy from your experience, or even possibly some sort of best practice in terms of the kind of tools and innovation that are in your sector. So starting with Philipp.
Hello. Hi. Nice being here. You've got air conditioning. That is a really bonus. So I'm from the private sector. As Parminder already mentioned, we're education holding in Germany. We've got a network of 6-7 universities all over Germany, also in Luxembourg and Czech Republic. We're expanding into the US via New York and particularly to China right now. Got some 20,000 students and vocational pupils, actually. And I just recently came to that organization to foster this digital transformation, product innovation, all those aspects that are related to this huge change that is going on. And the previous institution where I was, that tenfolded their student numbers actually over a period of 4 years just due to digital education, offering distance learning courses and increasing those numbers from 1,000 students from a traditional on-campus solution to a distance learning all online solution with 14,000 students. And as you can imagine, that was quite a transformation that was going on, and it shackled the understanding of what education actually is in that institution and how it's supposed to work. As for some input, I've been to Asia last year, not to Silicon Valley, but to Asia in an expert exchange on digital transformation, digital education. And I was very impressed to see how things are going there and how fast they're moving. In Malaysia, we had a meeting with a number of universities, and they were told that they had a MOOC strategy now that their state president wanted to be implemented, that they should offer 30% of all courses as MOOCs within the next couple of years, and say, well, that is impressive. So how long are you planning? 10 years, 15 years, or something like that? So I came from the German perspective. And they were saying that, no, we've got 3 years. And I said, 3 years for 30% of all content going MOOCed and digitalized. And I said, now you're 1 year into the program, what's the status? Yeah, well, we did it. And I was just like, what? We did what? And they said, well, yes, we've got our 30%. I mean, somebody told us we should, so we did. And that is an attitude that came completely unexpected and made me a bit worried when I look into the speed that our education system is in right now. So I hope that with you vibrant people sitting here, all interested in digital education, we're going to speed up things a bit.
Thanks, Philipp. Paul.
Hi, Paul Feldman. I'm the Chief Exec of Jisc. Jisc is the UK's public edtech, is the way I describe it. Our goal is to make the UK the best place to use technology in higher and further education and research, and we're doing pretty well on that. We support every university in the country, so every university is a member of Jisc and takes our services. I think in terms of the thing I would just say is when I started in this role just about 2 years ago, just under, and digital strategy was not really getting talked about in universities. And now you just can't walk into a UK university where they're not actively involved in a digital strategy or trying to get themselves ready to do a digital strategy. And it's quite a short time to have quite such a turnaround. It's fascinating.
Great, thank you, Paul. Aditya.
Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm Aditya Malik. I'm the CEO of Talentedge. We are a tech company in India, and we are focused on the higher education space. So picking on from where Philipp mentioned, so we, the population of 1.2 billion, and out of that, 65% of people below the age of 35 and hungry for degrees and certification. That's our target market. That's what we are chasing. That's what we are focused on. And with a vast country like India, which has 29 states, and the biggest shortfall is the shortfall of faculty or the good teachers, the EdTech rightly complements. And in 3 years of our existence, we have educated more than 100,000 students. And these students are working professionals. We work with 20 universities in India, and they are a lot of big universities like Ivy League colleges, etc. We work with them across the geography in India. And from a market perspective, just to share, as the Malaysian example was being shared, our Prime Minister is personally driving a concept called Digital India, and EdTech is close to his heart, and it rightly fits into the scheme of things. And that's why we feel it's ripe for us to get into it, and our numbers show that. So exciting times ahead. Look forward to interacting with you as the next 30 minutes go by.
And last but not least, Peggy.
Yes, good morning, everyone. Peggy McCready. I serve as the Director of Academic IT for the University of Oxford, which I'm sure you can imagine is pretty traditional in its teaching practices. And I've been with the university for a year and a half. When I arrived, they approved a digital education strategy, and I've been working with a small group that's charged with the implementation. This past year, we delivered the very first massive open online course at the university, which was a lot of fun and a great learning opportunity. I'm certainly not new to higher education. I've been working in higher education for over 20 years. Primarily in American higher education, and my research as a doctoral student actually took a look at the strategies that 3 very different universities were using to influence technology-enhanced teaching and learning practices. So I'm happy to be here today.
Great, thank you. So let's kick off with a nice, simple, not insubstantial question of what should a digital strategy consist of? And I think there are differences. It'll be interesting to see the difference between the private sector and the sort of state public sector. I'll start with Paul, because you probably have worked with quite a number of institutions on helping not only introduce a strategy, but also then execute it in terms of innovation and technology. Okay.
So, I mean, a digital strategy for a university ultimately should be very broad, and obviously it needs to cover the student experience, how you recruit students, manage them, how you sort of give them everything that they want, and degrees around that. And then for certainly a research-based university, there's a whole digital strategy around research. And I think today we'll be focusing on the teaching side of that, and then there needs to be a digital strategy for teaching. When we look at the teaching side, and if I just focus in on that aspect, we've done quite a lot of work with the universities to sort of understand how that should be. I mean, too many universities really want to go from zero to completely digital in no time at all. And we know from other sectors that you need to take a maturity curve approach. And we're certainly seeing that in higher education, and we can map out the sort of stages that universities should be thinking about going through. What we find is most universities are still in that sort of trying to understand space. What does great look like in digital? What does great look like for their particular university? And of course, there's such a wide range of universities. Everything from Oxford, where, and I've spoken to a few of the Oxford lecturers, it'll take a long time for some of those to adopt technology. And you get one like Northampton, which is just reinventing itself around technology, and where technology is the whole driver of the student experience, of the teaching process, of everything about it. And so you can't really pigeonhole it. And I suppose the message is, like in most sectors, you need to understand what you are as an organization and adapt your digital strategy to deliver that in the most effective way.
Thanks, Paul. So Aditya, I mean, we had a chat beforehand, and I'm interested in this sort of speed and which you're expanding your kind of approach to providing education through technology. And a lot of it you're talking about is remote education. So from a digital strategy perspective for HEIs, what would you say is the thing that they should introduce from your experience, and particularly say from sort of remote learning and lifelong learning?
Sure, thanks. So in my view, I'd like to go back to the basics. I think the first thing there is that looking at the target segment, what is the population which we are going after? Because it's just not about digitizing the courses and putting them on the cloud. People can log on to it. It's not just about building the MOOCs. It's just not about delivering them on video. Is it for the people who can afford and get admission to Oxfords and Cambridge and MITs and the Harvards of the world? Or is it for the people who have missed that out and still want a Oxford, Cambridge, Harvard education? So who's the right TG? Who are we trying to address? What's the right target segment? That's the first thing I think we should focus on from a digital strategy perspective. And second is a completely outside-in thinking in terms of figuring out how close the learning experience can be for the learner, keeping learner in the center of this thing. And when I speak to my team, the constant challenge to them is, how can you replicate the physical classroom experience? If after a class, I talk to them jokingly, but if after a class, a group of students want to go out for a coffee or a drink, the challenge is, how can you replicate that in a virtual environment? I know I don't have an answer, but that's the real thing where you can, how close and how near you can be to a face-to-face classroom and brick-and-mortar classroom. We have to strive to that. Unfortunately, what I have seen, we work with, as I mentioned, at least in that part of the world, we work with a lot of universities, and what we have seen is that the entire focus is on digitizing the curriculum, digitizing the courses, putting them on the cloud. The learner or the experience of the learner and replicating the physical experience is not something which is thought through. Maybe that will come after the digitization is complete, but I think that's a gap which is missing today. So these are the two things which I would recommend or we are focused on today.
Okay, very interesting. So just picking up from that, Peggy, somewhere like Oxford, is your strategy or is your approach one about sort of a new pedagogy, in terms of learning and the kinds of innovation that you're introducing? Or is it really, okay, look, we're looking at scale, or we're looking at sort of online delivery of existing courses?
So the strategy itself has 5 key areas of development, and I think as Paul mentioned earlier, those are very broad-based areas. So Part of it is just making sure that we have the appropriate tools or technologies in place that will allow academics to be innovative in their approach. I think one of the things that I would advise, regardless of your institution, is you can have all the resources in the world, but if you don't have a shared understanding of why that change is needed, I don't think you're going to be very successful, at least at leading broad-based change. So our approach is really a bottom-up approach, and we've been consulting with the academics and really asking them what are their priorities. And the number one thing that they've asked for is a virtual learning environment that allows them to do what they would like to do. And so we have to start there, but second on their list is making sure that they have learning technology support. And so you have to have individuals there that can talk with them about the educational objectives they have and think about which technologies might actually foster a better learning experience for the students.
And just going back to the students, what's driving this for the students? Is it their experience of technology outside of education and in other sectors? Or is it sort of that as they get a taste for EdTech, that they feel that this is actually a better experience?
I think it's a variety of things, but we do know that we have students coming in who have had experiences elsewhere where they just expect that those technologies are going to be available to them. The number one thing that our students were asking for was lecture capture when I arrived. Now, that's something 5 years ago I led the implementation at Yale University, so in a sense, we are behind our peer institutions. We now deliver lecture capture, but that was the number one thing that our students were asking for.
Okay, great. Thank you, Peggy. Philipp, so from a private university perspective, do you think, first of all, what do you think should be put into this mix of the digital strategy? And do you think your approach is different, say, from the state sector like Oxford?
Well, I'm not sure if it's that different, but of course, as a private university, we kind of bring in another perspective as well, and that is the market perspective and the business model perspective and all these aspects. And when we're talking about digital transformation, higher education, that does not only focus on the way we teach and how we do research, but it is also the front end of university that we should look at. And the front end is often processes, our contact problems with professors, with services, and so on. It's completely different information flow that we've got today that prospective students have. So the digital strategy does not only have to implement a teaching strategy, digital teaching and research strategy, it does also have to focus on those aspects. What services do we offer? How can we make those services more flexible, more adaptable? What are the different channels that people are using? How do we have to adapt there? And this is something that often is neglected to some extent. And private universities do good education, but we don't do excellent education in most cases. Okay, we're not Oxford, we're not Harvard, we're not Stanford, but students expect us to be better than particularly public universities in other fields, like services, like I can send an email or I can video chat with my lecturer and I get an immediate response and something like that. And other aspects are how open is our system to external accreditations, for example. What do we do with non-traditional certifications and so on? How are we going to accept that? How are we going to let that flow into our curricula and in our teaching? And these are all aspects that should be considered.
So let's pick up on that, because I know this is an area that you're interested in open innovation. And we're picking up on the fact that consumers or students are, want to see a particular direction of travel, which should influence the digital strategy. Who do you think should be involved in the process of helping to influence the direction?
Actually, as many people as you can, particularly from outside the university and like employers, other organizations, and also the students. And we made some excellent, just bring one case, because we mentioned open innovation. We had, at IUBH, we established an open innovation platform where students could give feedback on every single aspect of their studies. And also on the content. And they were free to design their own courses, their own majors, their own study programs, actually. And we upfront agreed that if you had at least 20 persons interested into one subject, we would offer that subject. We would build the course within a year, and a year after, people could choose that subject and that major. And we had, within a week of a launch, we had some 150 suggestions, ranging from technical implementations and technical solutions for problems that we weren't even aware of, up to really complex, detailed programs that people wanted to see. And we did 2 degree programs just out of those suggestions that came up. And I mean, people even had curricula in there. We had employers engaged and say, well, our aspect, if we want to recruit your students, we need these and those aspects. And that was a fascinating experience. So I can highly recommend offering something similar at your institutions.
So someone else, any of the other panelists want to pick up on that? On this, who should be involved? Who are the stakeholders involved in the devising of a digital strategy?
Look, so I mean, it's. I'm not sure there's much to add to Philipp. I mean, and again, I don't think digital strategy in education is any different to digital strategy per se. You need to understand what your customers think, and your customers in higher education, and they don't like being the lecturers don't like calling them this, but actually, there was a survey today that said 40% of students consider themselves customers of the university. So of course, you've got to listen to your students. Your lecturers are the ones that have to do this. You need your lecturers to be brought on board. They need to buy into it. They need to be evangelists. The best digital is done where you have a push from the top, but also that bottom-up hunger to do it right. And you've got to have the senior leadership of the institution pushing it, because without that, you end up with a group of enthusiasts, and you don't actually make the complete transformation that you need.
It's sort of a recipe, if you will, and you have a variety of different ingredients, and depending upon your institution, you may have to change those ingredients, but I agree, it has to be it's a collective effort, and if senior administration can be out and be talking about why teaching with technology is important, that is also incredibly helpful to having, a number of faculty or academics that are interested in exploring new ways of teaching.
So if I may add quickly in a 30 seconds one. First time we spoke to a large Ivy League college in India, they came back and said, in my mind, the biggest one, the adoption has to be from lecturers. The challenge he threw to me was that, how do I make sure that if people are logging on from home, they are doing the class, how are they engaging in the class? How do I know that they're not sleeping in the class, they're not engaging in the class? I told him, give me 12 months, I'll come back to you with a perfect solution. So today when we work with them and they've moved this side, the needle is moved this side, we have worked with them on machine learning, artificial intelligence, even sentimental analysis. Today on a screen of phone, I can share with the lecturer that how's this class looking like? How many people have done the homework? How many people have seen what page? How much time? How much energy has been, what's the emotion in the class? How many people have spent more than 2 minutes on one particular page? So I'm sharing this example in the context of the question asked by Parminder, is that the biggest adoption, or the people need to be involved, in our view, my personal experience has been the lecturer community, and once they have bought into it, they have seen the technology is easy, and they can actually understand their students better than they can understand face-to-face, they move this side completely.
Thanks, Aditya. And that brings me nicely, so we're rushing through here. We've only got about 7 minutes left. That brings me to technology, and I think we can't, I mean, I know there are other panels talking about the kind of the detail of the technology, but what kind of tools do you think need to be brought in as part of this sort of digital strategy? Let's start with you, Philipp.
Well, there's a question from the audience as well. If the missing learning science influences the use of digital tools. I think the digital tool itself is, you can't say you've got to bring in this or that. It really, really depends on the situation. But what we're seeing is that whatever you bring in, you've got to train the people with it, and they've got to adapt it, even particularly students. Because most students are very traditional, and as we would say, technology lazy, because they actually prefer recorded sessions. Yeah, that's the typical thing that people keep asking for. Why is that lecture not online? And that is the wrong question. Why is there a 1 hour lecture at all in that situation? E-learning has to be completely different than from the traditional classroom training. And if we were to huddle together and design the idea of a university from our today's perspective, it would be completely different than what we have today. And in some way, disruption is something that we would need for our education system as well. So the tool itself doesn't matter. It does matter what is marketing related, for example, for private universities, okay? Video-based teaching is very popular, so we offer video-based teaching, obviously. Augmented reality, virtual reality is pretty hot right now, so we're looking into that as well. And there are excellent applications on the market already, and a lot of very interesting cases where you could implement those technologies. But there's not this one technology that you should implement and could implement. It really depends on subject, on the circumstances, on the audience.
I mean, it's interesting. I went to Instituto de Empresa, the business school in Madrid, and they've got a virtual classroom where students are sort of beamed in, as it were, and they can run sentiment analysis and see people who are getting bored or look puzzled. You can divide the classroom up physically just on a screen and put them in little private rooms. And you've mentioned VR and augmented reality, and we're seeing a lot of work around, say, HoloLens and Microsoft, which is, provide a virtual learning space. Should higher education institutions be putting these into their strategies now and actually beginning to evolve and develop and innovate in these sectors?
I mean, I think and again, coming back to what Philipp said, I don't think they should be using technology for the sake of technology. It's what is the pedagogy, and it's got to start with what is the best way to teach a particular thing. And some things are going to be better through augmented and virtual reality. We've got an application for teaching people to use a music desk in a recording type studio. It's by far the easiest way to teach them. They can play around with it and learn it because these big pieces of a kit are expensive. You don't have many, so they can do a lot.
Where will that innovation come from? Is it going to come from within the institutions, the higher education institutions, or should they be partnering or looking externally, private organisations?
I think it's multi sources. So suppliers. I mean, someone will come up with a bright idea. EdTech startup. I've got this great way to teach. I know English, massive need in the UK at the moment, and that'll go in, and some people will take it up, and then it'll either fail or it'll grow from there. We've got some great lecturers here in the UK who are experimenting with lots of different ways to organise their teaching. The best ones is some of them have sort of just stopped lectures altogether, and they will use multiple different ways to actually get the pedagogy over. And sometimes it'll be the students demanding things. So I think it's multiple sources. There's no one size fits all.
Thanks.
If I may just add the whatever the technology innovation is, that has to happen in the back end. Front end to both the users, whether he's a lecturer or a student, the challenge has to be how do you fit into one mobile screen. The usability, like Uber, when we book Uber, ultimately nothing goes beyond a screen, and that's the ease of usage. So for a lecturer, for a student, ultimately it has to result into a operations out of mobile screen. Whatever the machine learning, AI, sentimental analysis has to be at the back end. That's how we have to think through that piece.
Right, thanks, Aditya. So, Peggy.
I would just add that, I mean, I agree with Paul that pedagogy has to come first. It's really, what is the question we're trying to answer? What is the problem we're trying to solve? And if your primary form of assessment is a 3-hour handwritten examination, and you're thinking about supporting computerized exams, which we are, that's a problem that we're really trying to solve. And then we start to take a look at which technologies might work best.
Thank you. Okay, we've got 20 seconds each on the last question. I did want to talk about data. I know there are questions there, but I'm going to go to data. How important is data, and what should you be doing? 20 seconds.
Well, data is essential, but how to gather it and how to analyze it correctly, that is really the issue. But it is really the basis for any artificial intelligence system, any adaptive learning, any improvement that you can do to materials, to technologies. So start collecting it if you can.
Okay, Paul.
I'd agree. Data is the future, and you just don't throw any of it away.
So I agree with that. That's going to define the experience and make sure that we provide enough input to make it better. So with you.
And I'd say start thinking about what data would be helpful to you and what questions are you trying to answer. Yeah.
Great, thank you. That's 30 minutes that have gone incredibly quickly. We've barely scratched the surface, but please thank our panelists, and I hope you've